Good morning. Welcome. Welcome to Tokyo University Forum, first day of C20 Summit 2019. My name is Yuta Maekawa, ADRA, and Japan Society Network on SDGs. I extend a warm welcome to each of you. Thank you very much for coming today. Today we have more than 400 participants. Thank you very much. Participants not only from Japan, but also from Africa, Asia, Pacific, North America, South America, and Europe. Thank you very much for being here in early morning on Sunday. Also, so grateful to you for deciding to spend all day inside this building on such a wonderful spring day. Yes. So anyway, thank you very much, and no worries, you'll never regret, because we're going to have fruitful, meaningful, and insightful discussion with distinguished speakers and each of you. Well, let's get started. First, I'd like to ask Ms. Yuka Iwatsuki, C20 co-chair, to make opening remarks.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for your introduction. I'm Yuka Iwatsuki. I'm the chair of the C20. I'd like to make an opening remark to distinguished guests and participants. As a chair, I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to all of you for attending the C20 Summit. I know some of you have traveled very long distance, so thank you for taking your time to being here. We are also thrilled to have as many as 400 people attending this summit today and the following days. I am also very pleased to have Mr. Kyoto Tsuji, Parliamentary Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs of Japan, Hiroshi Kato, Senior Vice President JICA, and Jinho Song, Vice President Koika, with us today. Thank you for being here. The reason why we gather today is very simple. We want the world to be a better place than now, and we believe it can be better. We are the ones who cannot divert our eyes from the inequalities, injustice, discrimination, deprivation of rights, distortion of the environment, violence against women and children, and unfair trade and architecture of the world economy, where the 8 men own the same wealth as the 3.6 billion people who make up the worst half of humanity. So in other words, each of us have a very concrete vision of the ideal world. And though it may vary to each person, one thing is common. We have not given up, and we have the determination to make the world a better place to live. So one way of doing so is to engage in the decision-making process of the G20. G20 is regarded as one of the groups that is very influential to the world, as it covers 85% of GDP, of the world's GDP, 85% of the world GDP, 80% of the world trade, and 2/3 of the world population. Thus, it is important role for the civil society to make the voices of the people heard. Voices of people who are not here, who doesn't benefit from the digital economy which is advancing rapidly, and who are voiceless, regardless of whether living in the G20 countries or not. But they are the people who would be affected by the decisions and actions that G20 will make. we would like to report you today that in advance to the C20 summit, we had an opportunity to hand the policy pack to the Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, the G20 chair under the Japanese presidency, as you can see in the photo. We regret that we were not able to have him with us during the C20 summit, but we appreciate that he took time to meet us, meet C20 delegates. If I may introduce a little bit about myself, I started my organization, ACE, in 1997 when I was a student. In my 21 years of experience of NGO activities, what I like most about it and what I find amazing about it is that you start working and collaborating together instantly once you met. Even though you never knew each other a day before, you never knew that person even existed a day before. I cherish this trust among us. So I would like to encourage you to take advantage of this opportunity for networking and widen your scope. We are experts on our specialties, expertise, but sometimes it becomes into two silos, too much concentrating on our own issues that you don't look around to see what's happening in other issues. So this is a perfect opportunity for us to get to know each other as well as to think about other issues that you are working on, to gain the different angle to look at your issues, as well as to find common grounds on the different issues. Also, I'm very glad that we have submitted a very professional recommendation on the wide range of issues to the G20, this policy pack. When I was still wondering a long time ago, about 15 years ago, whether I should become a professional NGO worker or I should earn my living in other way and pursue my career while I work as an NGO person as a volunteer. I consulted to one person who is a professional in international development. And her advice was, oh, you want to work in NGO? There are a bunch of amateurs. I don't recommend you to do that. So that was her advice. But at that moment, I was determined to prove her wrong someday. And I am very glad that I'm very convinced that with this policy pack full of expertise from the world, from you, that I proved her very, very wrong. So I'd like to appreciate the working group coordinators who facilitated and moderated to consolidate this policy pack. And we're really happy to have it with us. So please take advantage of this in advocating to the world and to your leaders when you go back. So lastly, thank you so much for being here today again. And I hope we will have a fruitful and meaningful discussion today, tomorrow, and day after. Thank you very much.
So let's prove we are so professional to make work better. Are you ready? Are you ready? Okay. Anyway, so let's move on. So we have this time, we expect you to actively participate in all the sessions and enjoy discussions. For that, we have ground rules for this conference. So please listen carefully. I'm going to test you later. We have 5 rules. Number 1, speak slowly. Okay? Number 2, speak concisely. Make your point. Okay. So please understand, we have no Japanese or no English native speakers here. Also, we have translators backside. So please give them space to understand what you say. Okay. And please identify yourself with your name, organization before you speak. And number 4, respect diversity. Respect others' opinions. And number 5, being on time. This might be very challenging. But anyway, okay. So repeat. Number 1, speak slowly. Number 2, speak concisely, make your point. Number 3, identify yourself with your name, the organization before you speak. And number 4, respect diversity, respect others' opinions. Number 5, being on time. Okay. So this will apply to all days. Tomorrow, day after tomorrow. Please remember. Thank you. Well, so let's move on. It is a great honor to have 3 honorable guests today from the Japanese and Korean governments. First of all, I'm going to ask the Honorable Kyoto Tsuji, Parliamentary Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs. His ministry has given a lot of support for this C20 Summit 2019. The Honorable, please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am Kyoto Tsuji. I'm the Vice Foreign Minister, and I'm not sure if I can abide by the first rule because I speak quickly, whether it's in Japanese, English, French, or German. But here it goes. I'll keep it. I understand you have a big day ahead of you, so I'll keep my remarks short and sweet as possible. Well, it's my great honor and pleasure to be here today at the Tokyo Democracy Forum opening session on behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan. And this Tokyo Democracy Forum is the 3rd forum on democracy held by civil society in Asia, following the Busan Democracy Forum in 2018 and the Ulaanbaatar Democracy Forum in January 2019. And I'd like to extend my heartfelt congratulations on convening the Tokyo Democracy Forum and the C20 Tokyo Summit. And today I'm pleased to see such a large number of civil society members from around the world. And I believe this shows a high level of attention to the overarching theme of the forum, promoting peace, human rights, and democratic governance through the SDG 16. And following this session, I understand several working groups will be held. And I sincerely wish that each group will engage in fruitful discussions because all the topics are important to reaching our mutual goal. The declaration of the Tokyo Democracy Forum, which we adopted at the end of this forum, was submitted to Prime Minister Abe, as shown there, in advance last week. And today, as a member of the government of Japan, I'd like to make a few comments on the theme of this forum: democracy, human rights, and peace. Our international order is based on common fundamental values such as freedom, democracy, basic human rights, the rule of law, and respect for international law. The international order is now facing challenges from various quarters. In order to maintain and strengthen it, concerted efforts are required from governments, civil society, and other actors. The government of Japan, in collaboration with the international community and civil society, is dedicated to leading discussions that contribute to the protection and promotion of the human rights of all people. To this end, the government of Japan will formulate a national action plan on business and human rights in cooperation with key stakeholders, especially civil society and the private sector. Gender equality and women's empowerment are also essential for a diverse, inclusive, and sustainable society in which no one will be left behind. One of the core SDGs imperatives. Japan has made women's empowerment one of the priorities and has been implementing various measures. Also, during our presidency of the G20 Summit, Japan will address gender-related issues as one of the main discussion topics. Last but not least, as I said at the February C20 face-to-face preparatory meeting, the wisdom and cooperation of not only governments, but also of civil society members are essential to address challenges that require a united international community. I sincerely welcome open, active, and fruitful discussions in today's Tokyo Democracy Forum and the C20 Summit meeting starting tomorrow. To conclude my remarks, I'd like to assure you that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan will continue working closely with civil society in various areas of international cooperation. Arigatou gozaimasu. Thank you very much.
Next, I ask Mr. Hiroshi Kato, Senior Vice President of Japan International Cooperation Agency. Mr. Kato, please.
Thank you, Mr. MC. And Yuka Iwatsuki-san, Chair the 2019 C20, and Mr. Thomas Garrett, Secretary General for the Committee of Democracies, Honorable Kyoto Tsuji, Parliamentary Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs of Japan, Mr. Son Jin-ho, Vice President of KOICA, and distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Since Mr. MC told us to be brief, and I'll be brief actually. I work for a governmental agency called JICA, the Japan International Cooperation Agency. And this is a gathering of civil society organizations. Now, being a representative of a governmental agency, I think there is a legitimate reason for me to talk about the collaboration between civil society organizations and the governmental or public sector. And that's exactly what I'm about to do in my brief statement. And my central message that I'd like to get across to you is that there is ample room for collaboration between the governmental sector and civil society organizations, especially in our efforts toward achieving SDGs, and particularly SDG number 16. The obvious reason for my belief that there is ample room for collaboration in this area is that the two sectors are both committed to promoting good governance, democracy, and peace and security. It is obvious that civil society organizations here are strongly committed to this issue. And so is the governmental sector, like the Japan International Cooperation Agency. I think our brother organization, KOICA, is likewise committed to this issue. And let me explain a little bit about how and why we at JICA are committed to this issue of good governance and freedom, peace and security. We uphold two guiding principles to guide our operations within JICA. One is the concept of human security, and the other is quality growth. And these two concepts have been upheld and articulated in the 2015 Development Cooperation Charter adopted by the government of Japan. As you know, the human security concept demands that everyone living on this earth must have the freedom to live freedom from fear, freedom from want, and freedom to live with dignity. And the concept of quality growth demands that says that, well, in order for us to alleviate or eradicate poverty, we need growth. But it doesn't mean any growth will do. And the kind of growth that we need to have must be, first, inclusive in the sense that everybody should enjoy the fruit of growth. The second, sustainable in the sense that it does not cause serious damage to the environment we live in. And third, our growth should be resilient in the sense that it can withstand various shocks such as economic crisis or disasters and other crises. And in order to achieve these human security and quality growth concepts, we need to have good governance. It is quite obvious. efficient governance, democratic parliament, and a functioning legal system, responsible corporate behavior, and responsible behavior of the civil society. All these are necessary for the achievement of human security and quality growth, the two concepts that we JICA uphold in our operations. And that is, for this reason, we are very much committed to the good governance of our developing partner countries as well as ourselves. And for this reason, we have been doing a lot of activities such as legal judicial development in Cambodia, strengthening mediation systems in Mongolia, community offices capacity development in conflict-affected areas in Sri Lanka, or participatory planning and community development, capacity development for local governance in Tanzania. So like this, we have been committed to the issue of good governance in our partner countries. And you are also committed to good governance of all governments, including Japan and governments of developed countries as well as developing countries. And another reason for me to believe that there is an even greater possibility of collaboration between the public and the civil society organizations is that the definition of, the time's up, expansion of the definition of governance. We have tended, or JICA have tended to focus our attention on the governance of the government. But with the arrival of SDG era, the definition of governance has expanded, and now it has come to cover the governance of corporate sector and the behavior of citizens ourselves. So in order for us to deal with these issues effectively, there should be more wider, more active, and deeper collaboration between the various sectors, corporate, government, and civil society. So my central message is that there should be more collaboration between us, and for this occasion, this is a good occasion for us to confirm that there should be and there can be more collaboration between us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kato. Now, I ask Mr. Jin Song, Vice President of Korea International Cooperation Agency. Mr. Song, please.
I will have to the 10-minute presentation, but I will have 9 minutes. おはようございます。私は韓国の小池の常務理事、ソンジノと申します。よろしくお願いします。おめでとうございます。日本語は以上です。頭がこれです。Good morning, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honor to participate in today's forum this morning. First of all, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the Permanent Secretariat of the Committee of Democracies, Asia Democratic Network, and Asia Development Alliance for hosting this forum. With the high-level political forum, HLPF on sustainable development only a few months away for a review on global progress toward SDG 16 in this year, in July, in New York. Today's forum is timely and opportune in that it brings together a diverse group of leaders to discuss a wide range of important topics related to SDG 16. Let me begin with my remarks by sharing Korea's story. It is quite well known that Korea has achieved its economic growth in a short time in the aftermath of the devastating civil war and the suffering from an eventual division of the nation in between the South and North Korea. This experience is often referred to as the miracles of Han River. However, it is relatively less known that Korea has also achieved high level of democracy and human rights just in the same generation. I would like to stress that the road to democracy in Korea has never been easy, but throughout our historical experiences, we Koreans know that democracy is worth fighting for because an economic development is truly meaningful when it accompanied with peace, human rights, and democracy. I would also like to emphasize that Korea's development experience was not just realized by one-sided effort or government-driven initiative, but it was in fact made possible through the tripartite effort of civil society, government, as well as citizens itself. Democracy is stimulated and prerequisite for poverty reduction, human rights improvement, realization of gender equality, and sustainable development. In other words, democracy is the foundation and prerequisite to achieve SDGs in developing countries. This tells us that we are still yet to be satisfied when it comes to spreading democracy around the world. Some might think in a binary way that democracy does not feed people. It does not feed people. However, peace, respect for human rights, and gender equality cannot be established without a democracy, even with a certain level of economic development. Above all, the fruits of economic development cannot be handed over to the citizens, each of citizens, in the absence of democracy. President of the Republic of Korea, President Moon Jae-in, he mentioned that democracy is right, and right should be democracy. As such, democracy should mean more than its superficial statement even to those suffering from severe inequality. The voices of citizens longing for democracy and human rights in developing countries should be listened, and we should step forward to build capacity together. Because of this, the significance of international and regional cooperation as well as solidarity to promote and consolidate democracy is ever more pressing. As democracy is never a final state but a continuous process of development, cooperation with various entities is necessary to make progress. This is why building institutions in which diverse actors could participate, collaborate, and make their voices heard really matters. In the process of Korea's democratization, Korean civil society has made major contributions in three aspects, including the first, political development, second, balanced economic growth, and social integration. First, Korean civil society has been a driving force of political democratization and contributed to enhancing governmental transparency and accountability as a watchdog and critical partnership of national policy. Second, Korean civil society played a key role in representing the interests of the minority and marginalized groups in the process of rapid economic growth. Thirdly and finally, Korean civil society has played a leading role in creating an inclusive society by coordinating social conflict in the Korean society. And internationally, the participation and role of the civil society is gaining more and more importance. Civil society is expected to play a bigger role in promoting democracy and resolving social inequality in developing countries. More importantly, not only the legal system, but also the empowerment of citizens itself is critical in order to sustain a long-lasting democracy. While I am currently the Vice President of KOICAN, I was once a recipient of an international development cooperation program and fund for Christian student movement and civil movement supported by the Canadian and US and European foundations, charities, churches, and donor agencies. With these overseas funding resources, I was able to take part in the student movement leadership, CSR activities such as YMCA, COFI, KAIDET, GCAP, and even co-chair of the Busan Democratic Forum, and 5 times participation of the C20 Summit from Toronto, Seoul, Cannes, Los Cabos, and even Moscow in year 2013. I personally felt that the empowerment of the individual citizens could eventually contribute to development of the respective countries at the national level too. In line with the global commitment, KOICA as Korea's leading development cooperation agency is fully committed to core and universal values of SDG Goal 16 on basic human rights and democracy. Thus, it strives for inclusive partnerships for global development agenda. Such basic spirit and principles are also fully embraced in our so-called 4P policy, including people, peace, prosperity, and climate, which KOICA originally has adopted last year. Starting from Busan Democratic Forum held last year February, KOICA has been continually supporting and participating in various SDG 16 related forums, such as the Seoul Peace Forum in last year September, Bamboo World Human Rights Peace Forum in last year October, and the Pyeongchang Peace Forum this year February. In addition, KOICA has been also supporting the annual showcase of the 60 Plus Forum since year 2017, and will continue to participate in this meaningful discussion of its second meeting, which will be held in Delhi tomorrow, last day in this October. With the lessons learned from various domestic and international discussion platforms, we are currently incorporating the core values of peace, human rights, and democracy into our project, into our progress. And this is a firm expression of KOICA's commitment for the realization of SDG Goal 16 to deliver visible, feasible, and tangible results. While continuing its effort to seek innovative partnership and broaden our partnership base, KOICA is making parallel efforts to expand the scope of our project, such as strengthening legislative and judicial capacities, management of system for fair economic activities, enhancing capacity of civil societies, and increasing youth and women empowerment too. Ladies and gentlemen, various efforts are necessary in order to support the implementation of SDG in our partner countries. Among them, the effort to implement core values such as democracy, peace, and human rights are especially urgent in this era. In particular, additional efforts by diverse entities are essential since SDG Goal 5 and 16 are goals that relate to all areas from SDG Goal 1 through 17. KOICA is responsible for establishing exemplary ODA projects related to SDG Goal 15, and we are expected to play a leading role in regional international cooperation in promoting ODA through core values. We need to utilize our experience of democracy and human rights enhancement, but at the same time, seek measures that are in line with their own traditional, cultural, and socio-economic status of developing countries to avoid unilateral and forceful transplanting. We will continuously assist each country's efforts in achieving sustainable development and expanding SDGs projects to strengthen peace, human rights, and democracy by reflecting the characteristics of our partner countries. Ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, in pursuing these endeavors, KOICA will continue to work with our valuable partners here who have joined us today, and will make cooperative effort to realize the 2030 agenda, which is to create inclusive, sustainable, and resilient future in order to leave no one behind. I'm looking forward to listening to the insight and wisdom you will be sharing with us today. Thank you very much. arigatou gozaimashita.
So, thank you very much all the three guests. Please give them a round of applause. So as you can see, we're ahead of schedule. It's a good practice, right? So, anyway, thank you very much. And let's move on next session. Before that, let me repeat one point of housekeeping. Please return receiver's translation to the desk on the first floor when you leave the building. Please remember this. Thank you. Now, we're moving to the first plenary session. Why transparency is so important for democratic governance. And this session will be facilitated by Mr. Anselmo. Mr. Lee is a prominent leader for civil society in Asia and a good friend of Japanese society. So Mr. Lee, please. Are you ready?
Okay, good morning, everybody. Are you okay? Are you awake? Good morning. My name is Anselmo Lee from Korea. I'm advisor to Asia Development Alliance and also COICA and also Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Korea. So I'm professional advisor to many. I'm very happy to be here as a moderator of first sessions. And I would like to invite first speakers podium, and then I will make some opening remarks. Okay. So can you see your program? So everything is well organized. Oh yeah, see you can screen. If you find your name, please come here. Because I could not be the one person, you know. I don't have who, you know. Please come. Let me call your name. So first, we have a keynote speaker, Maria, Emilia, oh yeah. Yasuomi Sawa, and Eniko Nagasawa, and Kasuna Yamamoto. So we have 5 speakers and 1 moderators. You see, we try very hard to make a gender balance, right? So thank you for organizers, all the collaborators. You know this place. Do you know this building? What is the name of this building? It's a Sacred Heart University, right? Before I learned this morning, this building was building of JICA, right? You know, JICA, Japan International Cooperation Agencies. I was very happy to surprisingly very happy to see, you know, this connection. You know, this academic institution, the former JICA. Now we are as a civil society, we are using these facilities. It's a good symbol of the civil society, academic, government cooperation. And also, let's give a big hand to the. And also, today, you know, today is a very special day for those who believe the Christianity. You know, it's Easter day. So I want to also congratulate all the Christian communities for Easter holiday, not holidays, special celebration. We are working holidays. and also, this morning we listened to several speeches, and this is also another good sign of collaboration between the government and the development agencies and civil society. But as you see the composition of the panel, this is another extended partnership. So we have 5 speakers. Of course, some of them are from the civil society, but also we have a private sector, 1 person, and also a journalist. Okay. So we are going to discuss this morning, as we see in the program. Title is why transparency is so important for democratic governance, and this is the topic of SG 16. As you know, SG 16 title is a peaceful, just, inclusive society. We call PhD. In Korea, we call PhD. Peace, human rights, democracy. Not doctoral PhD. Not PhD is not to study and get. PhD is something you need to practice. So peace, human rights, and democracy. But we want to pick up transparency as entry point. Transparency among the many important issues. That's why we have 1 panel speaker about transparency, and then we have 4 panelists. They will give their own perspective from different backgrounds, you know, from journalists and private sector and education and gender. You know. Some from Japan, some from Africa, and then we open the floor for your comments and questions. Okay? So we have a 15-minute presentation, and then about 7 minutes panel discussion, and then Q&A. So this is a very nice notebook. It's for your note taking to prepare your question, not for decoration. It's not gift. Please open this nice book. And then take your point, and then our moderator says, speak slowly and concisely, right? Okay? So let's begin the morning plenary. First, let's invite Maria and Emilia. You have a 15. Let's give a big hand to Maria and Emilia.
very much for the warm welcoming. And I want to start my speech with a question. If I gave you today $1 trillion, how would you spend it? I imagine that perhaps many of you would be really tempted to buy, like expensive properties in luxury locations. Many other of you would prefer to buy really a fast car or even a luxury jet in the Caribbean. Let me tell you that the proceeds of corruption and the illicit financial flows that all too often circulate through the world's financial institution after being extracted and stolen from countries and mainly citizens, all too often end up being spent in this way. Of course, we at Transparency International will always say that corruption is a major problem. But $1 trillion is the figure that the IMF recently showed that each and every year, countries lose because of corruption in tax revenues. So today I want to invite you to think what this means for SDGs, what $1 trillion really means and which impact would have in SDGs this huge amount of money. The SDGs are ambitious, and we really need to achieve this. We want to end poverty, save the planet, ensure that everyone enjoys peace and prosperity. And of course that this is an outstanding framework in order to address the major challenges that we are facing nowadays as a global community. Ambitions of this case brings together a sizable price tag. United Nations estimates that low and lower middle income countries may need to increase their public and private expenditure in more or less $1.4 trillion per year in order to achieve SDGs. The $1 trillion the IMF says we lose every year due to corruption would of course buy a lot of super jets or cars or amazing properties. But it would also go along well by implementing SDGs where the need is greatest, in low and lower middle income countries. Of course, I know that it isn't as simple as this, Many times there is a long road from tackling corruption to actually making sure that the money goes where it really needs to go. But my point, and what I want to show today, is that this illustrates the scale of the problem that we are facing, the scale of global corruption problem, and how a failure to address corruption as a cross-cutting issue for achieving SDGs, all the SDGs, not only SDG 16, will undermine our ambitions. And at the same time, how tackling corruption should be part of achieving and implementing all the SDGs. In this sense, the SDGs are not just a challenge. They represent an enormous opportunity for all of us, not only to invest in communities all over the world, but also to address corruption in the process in which we are implementing SDGs. Doing so will have really a dramatic impact in people all over the globe. Corruption represents really a major obstacle to the whole society and to achieving the SDG agenda. It impacts in economic growth, increased poverty, deprive most marginalized people from their basic rights. And it's also, when I mean basic rights, I'm talking about health, I'm talking about education, I am even talking about gender equality. We at Transparency International know that corruption impacts women and poor people the most. Furthermore, it exacerbates inequality. Our research shows that across the world, almost a quarter of the world's poorest people paid a bribe compared to the 14% of wealthy. And let me give you a clear example about this. In Bangladesh, for example, 1 in 4 poor families who are trying to enroll their children in a specific education program for poor people were obliged to pay a bribe. And this is really that something upsets me a lot, and it upsets me so much because this shows how corruption is denying people their basic right to education, to health care, and basically their basic right to improve their quality life. Equally, corruption undermines smart, innovative companies by giving public contracts, for instance, in large-scale infrastructure projects, to corrupt companies who see paying a bribe as a shortcut to win a contract. Because not enough information is published about where taxpayers' money goes, these corrupt deals remain hidden. But let me tell you something. Despite the lack of transparency in this area, due to the work that many NGOs, and we have many representatives here in this floor, and also international organizations have been doing in the last years, we know that globally, around 25% of public procurement contracts get lost every year due to corruption. And this is a lot of money. So we have the $1 trillion and we have this 25%. The SDGs present us with a gold-plated opportunity for real, systematic, and sustainable change that will benefit billions of people all over the world. Business, governments, and civil society will really have a key role to play in order to make sure that we don't miss this once-in-a-generation opportunity. And let me tell you something, the G20 must also play a key role in moving this agenda forward. Last year, all of us as C20 made history at the G20. During the build-up to the G20 in Argentina, the Business 20, which is the specific engagement group that represents the private sector, and the C20, which as you know represents civil society organizations, released 3 joint statements on anti-corruption. One about gender and corruption, and the other 2 statements highlighting the crucial role that anti-corruption efforts have in maintaining economic and financial stability all over the globe. And maybe you are wondering why this is historic. And let me tell you why I say that we did history. We did history because for the very first time ever in the G20 history, these 2 engagement groups who don't always find themselves at the same, place in the debate, came together, worked together, united their voice in order to ask G20 countries to create specific anti-corruption action plans to help combating cross-border corruption and build accountability. Perhaps what is more surprising about these joint statements to push the G20 to really take action is that we weren't asking for anything new. We were only asking G20 countries to fulfill their commitments, especially their anti-corruption commitments, of which we have more than 60 since the year 2010. Also, last year, more than 600 civil society organizations from more than 45 countries worked closely together through a transparent, inclusive process and sent a clear message to G20 leaders. The international community is facing common challenges. Whether growing inequality between or within countries, impacts of climate change, environmental degradation, health crisis, corruption scandals, the gender gap, global debt, really serious risk of a new financial crisis, inequitable access to education, or the impacts of digitalization and technology in our life, our common challenges require common solutions. We all know that these are not easy times for multilateralism, but there is no other option. Shared problems need shared solutions. World leaders need to urgently come together to find sustainable, concrete answers for today's problem. Sadly, in the last few years, we have seen very little evidence of any real progress from G20 leaders. A recent report from Transparency International assess how well G20 countries are doing in tackling problems of money laundering and anonymous companies' ownership. And we found very concerning weaknesses in almost all G20 countries. These are the type of weaknesses that had the $1 trillion flow out of national budgets every year. With so many competing priorities, it's important for the G20 to keep a clear focus in order to implement their commitments. Why make new promises when the previous ones are still outstanding? And this leads me to another question. What would make the G20 a success this year? If at least the G20 could focus on 3 topics this year, we would be able to say that it was really a good G20. First of all, the G20 needs to drive forward progress in Japan. This is a real opportunity to use the G20 to generate improvements in sectors that matter the most to Japan, such as infrastructure, one of the G20 priorities this year, to set new standards in development and economic growth that work really for everyone. Every decision must have citizens at the heart. It must be an inclusive G20. Secondly, the G20 must do more than make speeches. There are many existing commitments made by the G20 in the last year. A quick scan just of the anti-corruption working group shows that we have materials available on beneficial ownership, transparency, public procurement, open data, and I could continue telling you all the commitments that they have. And what we have seen is that all these commitments are really far away from being implemented. If the G20 makes a promise, they should stick to it. They should not generate more hot air. At least from our perspective, commitments, implementation, and accountability are really the perfect match. Thirdly, the G20 needs to make economic growth work for all and not just for a few. We must, as the Prime Minister Abe has said, promote a free and open, inclusive and sustainable human-centered society. For that to work, policies must seek to push for inclusive growth with nobody left behind. Putting anti-corruption front and center of the G20 priorities is a first step in order to achieve this. Every decision or policy or arrangement made, for example, on infrastructure investment, needs to make sure it is efficient and effective, and mostly that it works for the people. Governments have a central role to play in tackling corruption and ensuring the implementation of G20 commitments and the SDG agenda. But even as the space for civil society shrinks around the world, civil society groups are increasingly important for moving this agenda forward. Of course, you can say that I am obliged to say this because I work for an NGO and I'm really so proud to work for an NGO. But at least from my perspective, we as civil society bring a unique skills to the table. First of all, we have expertise. Civil society groups are composed of some of the world's greatest experts around the world. Second, we hold accountable. Civil society will hold governments accountable because we want the best outcomes. We work so that both governments, time and resources are used effectively and in the best interest of citizens. So when governments commit to something, we will hold them accountable. And this is because we want the best results. We know that sometimes they don't like this, but we will keep on holding accountable. Third, we explain. Much government policy is too technical for normal citizens. Civil society can help explain what change means. So governments should talk to us, should collaborate with us, should build tools with us. And this leads me to my fifth idea, that is collaborate. Civil society is not just a watchdog. We include innovator, policy expert. Governments, again, should collaborate and work closely together with us. This is why I strongly believe we should all be very proud the way the official civil society group, the C20, has been working in recent years. We have increasingly become a space which is seen as propositional and constructive, while at the same time maintaining its principles of being inclusive and open. We are looking forward to become a more stronger group and more stable partner of the G20 and the rest of the engagement groups. And let me now move forward to the third question, that is, why is transparency so important for democratic governments? And I would emphasize, why is democratic governance important for ending corruption? To better reflect this, I would say that the Washington Post added a slogan which says, democracy dies in darkness. And I believe that this is so strong, and it would be equally true to say that in darkness, corruption thrives. Stopping corruption means more transparency. Transparency, accountability, and effective citizen participation are key pillars of democracy. But as our research shows, the well-functioning democracies are also critical to reducing corruption. This has serious implications for our ambitions for SDGs. Our 2010 Corruption Perception Index, which assesses public sector corruption in 180 countries all over the world, highlighted a truth. Corruption is much more likely to flourish where democratic foundations are weak. And we have some concrete recommendations to do in order to ensure that this can change. First of all is strengthening democratic institutions to preserve checks and balance. Second, close the implementation gap between anti-corruption legislation, implementation, and enforcement. Third, empower citizens to speak out and hold governments accountable. And fourth, protect press freedoms. Transparency starts by ensuring public access to information that belongs to citizens, and which should be timely, relevant, updated, and accurate. But we also need to bring the fight against corruption into the 21st century. And there, technology plays really a key role in the next generation of anti-corruption work. But I want to say that as well as it plays a key role, it also has a lot of challenges. Both governments that really want to tackle corruption use technology for good, but the corrupt people are also using technology for bad. So we should be really careful about this. All in all, with almost 10 years to go until 2030, and with a critical implementation gap between promises and action, it is time to join forces and find common solutions to the global challenges that we are facing. We currently live in a world where only 6 countries give women and men equal employment rights, where it will take 108 years to close the implementation gap. We also live in a world where hundreds of millions of people are living in extreme poverty, while huge rewards go to those at the very top. All these problems have a common denominator, and unless we tackle it, it will not be possible for us to achieve the world that we want as set out in the 2030 agenda. This common problem is corruption. That is why today I have an invitation for all of you. I want you to start working closely together with me and my colleagues all over the world in order to do changes in this map. This is our Corruption Perception Index, where we have scores from 0 to 100. And this shows how well countries are being in assessing corruption. And let me put this in clear words, More than 2/3 of countries score below 50 on this year's CPI, with an average score of just 44. Imagine that this was a school, and this means that each country is a student. The result means that more than half of the countries of the world are failing the anti-corruption class. So, shall we join forces, work together in order to make sure that the G20 listens to our call for action, implement their commitments, and really move forward the SDGs agenda? Thank you very much.
Can you keep this one, this slide? Thank you, Emily, for your powerful statements. I still remember what you said, one quotation, democracy dies in darkness, right? I think it's a very powerful statement. Democracy dies in darkness, which means when everything is in darkness, we cannot make any progress, especially SDG and then many other goals. As you know, this Tokyo Democracy Forum is the third one. The first one was Busan, last year January. Second one was Ulaanbaatar Democracy Forum. So this is an event at the same time progress and the process, the event and process. And also this is a part of C20, which is a part of G20. So I want to quickly, before we go to the panel, reality check where we are today. Who were in Busan last year? Who were in Busan? Wow, I see about 20 hands. And then, okay, thank you. And then who are the host of Busan? Please, those are from Busan, please stand up. We have a few from Busan, right? Anybody from Busan? Okay, please stand up to show your face. And Songjino, you also from Busan, right? So I want to recognize their contribution to the Busan Democracy Forum with the starting. And second, Ulaanbaatar, who are participants of Ulaanbaatar Democracy Forum, would you please stand up? So your contribution, you want to recognize your contribution. Okay, thank you. And we are also from Ulaanbaatar, which is the host of the Ulaanbaatar Democracy Forum. Now we are here in Tokyo, So we hope to continue, The Busan, Ulaanbaatar, Tokyo, and there was a steering committee meeting yesterday among other Asia Development Alliance and the ADN. They are going to have a fourth one in Kathmandu, So this is the process. At the same time, this is C20. I want to also remind you, there was a C20, as you know, started 2013, right, Russia. But 2010, there was also first civil society gathering during the time of the G20 summit in South Korea at that time. So 2010, that time was called Civil G20 Dialogue. I still remember there was some Japanese participants in the 2010, that means 9 years before. So who were in 2010 in the Civil G20 Dialogue? Please raise your hand. Who were 2010, long time ago, 10 years ago, over 9 years ago, in South Korea? I see the few. And Oashi-san here, Oashi-san is there. Oashi-san is the director of this university. He was 9 years ago, Civil G20 meeting, and also Inaba-san, also the several. This shows also civil society engagement already started 10 years ago. So now in this meeting, democracy process, civil society process, we are meeting around SDG, particularly SDG 16, in particular transparency. So I want to help you to put in the context where we are and what we are going to discuss. As you know, SDG 16, there are 12 goals. Those who are not familiar with the SDG 16, so you can pick up this one. This is a declaration of Ulaanbaatar Democracy Forum. You can see the 12 targets, and also the other one is Busan Democracy Forum. If you don't have this one, please raise your hand. We will distribute this one. Yerum, could you please distribute? We have several copies of these two documents while listening to the panel, so you can read briefly what we have discussed last two Democracy Forum. Okay? So SDG 16 is one of the 17 goals, and it is called Goal for Governance, and also another one, SDG 16 is a driver, enabler, and accelerator of SDG, whole SDG. I want to tell this one because when we discuss transparency, because other panelists, they will give you their own perspective, different background, journalists, private sector, civil society, but we are not discussing only SDG 16 alone. It has to be part of broader 17 goals: health, education, poverty, economic growth, and so on and so on. That's why I want to pay attention to the overall SDG, especially all 12 targets of SDG. All right. So with this background, I'd like to invite one by one the panelists. 7 minutes, please, and then so that we have time for questions and answers. Okay. The first panelist, As keynote speaker stressed, freedom of information, journalists, independent journalists, very important. I'd like to invite Yasui Sawa from Kyoto News. Please welcome me with a big.
Thank you very much for introducing me. My name is Yasui Sawa from Kyoto News, the Japan News License. Thank you for coming. I'm most delighted to have such an opportunity to share my idea of journalism and transparency and democracy. Thank you. First, I'm a Japanese journalist working with Kyoto News, and I'm now an investigative journalist. And you have heard something about Panama Papers project 2 years ago. I was a member of that project. This is Panama Papers actually, and these documents are secret one, leaked from a Panama law firm called Mossack Fonseca. And there are so many things like mail, tax notes, passports, and such a huge amount. And what is most important in these documents are the true identifications of the secret company, anonymous company activities that Maria said in the previous one. And so we have so many very important people in the document. Then they are underlined that these are legal. That is a problem. These are legal, even legal. So why these true identities are so important to tackle crime and corruption? First, let me tell something about tax havens. So, perhaps you recognize tax havens as the place where tax is so low or zero. Well, it is not the entire problem of tax havens. The transparency is very poor there. That means you can do financial activities in secrecy. For example, this is a property registry in Tokyo. It says Harajuku, as it is can be tried from here, in central Tokyo, very popular. One property is owned by a company in British Virgin Islands. That is well known as a tax haven. So I asked a registry official about the identity of those who own that company, which own the land in Harajuku. Well, this is the answer. So please register, but private. So they can't disclose. Okay, that means the tax havens, anonymous companies. So that is the core problem of tax havens. We can't know anything about who is behind the company. That is a hotbed of corruption. That is where $1 trillion, Maria said, is missing. So why or how we, the investigative reporters, done with the Panama Papers, with that how we use public documents. So that is, so for example, these kind of things are very useful for investigative reporters to dig out deeper. So these are very, very important to tackle crimes, tackle corruption, and share all problems with our society, with the public. For example, we found a project of tax havens, let's say telecommunication giant in Japan, a KDDI subsidiary. And fortunately, I would like to say fortunately, they are involved in lawsuits. So we can find something in the court record in Hong Kong, and next one is from Singapore. But it doesn't happen in Japan because court records are very difficult to access here. And we can't make a photocopy like this. even we are allowed to access court record in Tokyo, we are allowed just inspect, just see it, but we can't get photocopy. It's ridiculous, isn't it? So these are the reality of transparency here. We are, the investigative reporters here, are obliged to do as much as possible with these restricted resources. Most recently, perhaps 13 years ago, a new act was enforced called Personal Information Protection Act. It is always very good pretext to decline information. I said a lovely magic word. They always say, yes, when I ask a question to our official that, how many Brazilian national public accountants here? They said, it might be personal information. What? The number of public certified accountants with Brazilian passport, that's the number. It's always used like this. So, this is the Yakuza chart. Actually, I use it in paper investigation, but this is published in with, you can see the right corner, the United States. But this kind of thing is not public in Japan. It is ridiculous. We have to dig this kind of information from United States resources. So, perhaps there might be more with corruption. You know, so it is very difficult. As you know, we respect privacy, journalists respect privacy as much as possible, but transparency is sometimes uncomfortable. But what I'd like to underline here is we have to share the sense of public good. Transparency is the key, has to play a key role to the key power, keep those in power accountable. Thank you very much.
I was also very surprised, so Japan is very advanced and very transparent, but what you're saying is a lot of, and you show the Yakuza even photo, So at least here we are very transparent, right? Okay, thank you for your contribution. I think it's a very powerful message. So let's discuss more, how we make it, not only Japan, but I believe Japan compared to other countries much better, nevertheless, other countries. So let's make the whole Asia world even better, more transparent. Okay, let's move to the next one. As you said, I was very surprised, your title is SDG Promotion Bureau. Wow, I never seen such a title in the business community, I'm very happy to see. I'm also very curious, what you would like to say. So let's invite with a big hand from the MFO from in Japanese K-Dan, so Association of Business Communities. I think it's very, as you know, SDG cannot be achieved by government alone, not with the civil society alone. We need a full cooperation with the private sector. This is a clear example of commitments. Please.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased to be here, but I feel uncomfortable after Maria and after these two messages. And I'm half business people, but personally, I am C20, belong to C20. So I feel uncomfortable. And I met Maria and Yuka with B20 Secretariat, but unfortunately, there is no joint statement on
maybe we can do it. We are
anti-corruption, yeah. But business sectors share the same value about anti-corruption, and because transparency is important for business, mainly two reasons. One is enhanced corporate value. Stakeholders, especially investors, has begun judge and choose cooperation based on ESG and SDG related disclosed information. Second is the realization of sustainable society is important because it's foundation of the business development itself. Next, please. KLAN is a comprehensive economic organization with membership of more than 1,300 companies in Japan. Next, please. In order to build an affluent and vibrant society under a fair and free market economy, KLAN has advocated corporate must behave with a strong sense of ethical value and responsibility. To this end, KLAN established the Charter of Corporate Behavior in 1991. Next, please. The latest revision of the Charter was in 2017, and its primary aim was proactively delivering on the SDGs through the realization of society. That is why I belong to SDG Promotion Bureau. Society 5.0 is the fifth newest society where the both growth, economic growth, and resolution of the social issues can be achieved, making the most of cutting-edge technologies with the imagination and creativity of diverse people. 10 articles of the Charter are interrelated, and a holistic approach is necessary for corporate accountability and SDG Goal 16. I will explain the related one. The first article reflects the idea of Society 5.0 the most. Next, please. Article 2 deals with the fair business practices, including corruption, anti-corruption. Next, please. Article 3 deals with fair disclosure and stakeholder engagement with the purpose of enhancing corporate value. Next, please. Article 4 is the respect for human rights, including human right due diligence. I'd like to explore this topic a little bit further. Next, please. We took the survey on the revised charter, which includes questionnaire on business and human rights. Next, please. We found the mechanism such as education, training, and framework development have made headways. However, as you know, as you see, only about 13% address topics are relevant to human rights due diligence. Japanese companies will need to do more in this area. Next, please. The accelerator for business and human rights in Japan will be as follows. National Action Plan of Business and Human Rights will be issued maybe in the middle of the 2020. And the Tokyo Olympic and Paralympic has a procurement code of sustainable development, including human rights. And the third is revision of the immigration control law. You probably have interest on this. And the global attention to human rights of foreign workers who push the business to do more. And the next one is through the crisis management. This article deals with the crisis management. And this tells us lessons for the how we develop, how we tackle with corruption and business and human rights issues. I will talk about that later, maybe in the discussion. And next, please. This is the Article 10, last one, dealing with the role of top management implementation of this charter throughout the corporation and encourage the supply chain to do the same. Next, please. The Tokyo B20 Tokyo Summit Joint Recommendations has a section that deals with voluntary action plan for responsible business conduct. In order to conduct business in social responsible manner, business needs the rule-based, free, fair, and open international economic order. And this order must be strengthened through enhanced policy coordination, updated rules, and increased compliance. In parallel, each G20 country should undertake the necessary structural reform in a decisive manner. So B20's policy proposal to G20 are along with this line. Personally, from my experience of promoting CSR and SDGs in K-Dong for more than 20 years, I strongly believe the collective action and multi-stakeholder partnership are the keys to achieve SDGs. Transparency and honest communication is the basis of such relationship. Thank you very much.
I believe after discussion you feel comfortable or less uncomfortable. Take it easy. I think it's a very, and also very brave and a good example, because usually the private sector are very reluctant to come to this type of forum. You know? That's why I'm really happy to see, appreciate your presence, and also this charter which reflect, SDGs spirit and the principle. I think it's a really good example we need to share. I never seen such an effort. Of course, it's not perfect. We need to improve, but nevertheless, such an effort itself, I think, worthy of being shared by many other countries. Thank you for your, the courage to come and share your cases. Okay, let's go to Africa, far away from here we are in the far east, but there are a lot of activities are going on in Africa around the SDGs, right? The young people, and there's a campaign to Rising Africa, very interesting initiative. Okay, could you please come, Catherine, to share what we are doing in Kenya and Africa? Let's welcome the big hand.
Thank you so much. I believe I'll have the biggest challenge with the first instruction to speak slowly. So I'll ask for solidarity from the audience to slow me down if I am too fast. My name is Catherine Nyambura. I'm from Kenya. I will attempt to represent other African voices, but as you know, we are very diverse, and I can probably just speak for the context that I understand. And my focus will be on young people, but mostly also from a gender lens. And I'll just start speaking about transparency from a policy agenda and from how we see it constructed in Africa. In many instances, for young people, we tend to have very macro and hegemonious approach to policies with a less focus on transparency, much less governance. So currently the biggest policy framework for young people is demographic dividend, which one looks at 4 pillars like education, employment, health, and civic participation. But for sure, what we see is much less focus on civic participation and much less focus on gender. And I will go to be bold enough to say, for us to harness demographic dividend, we must be bold enough to also push for a gender dividend. I will be bold enough to say a feminist dividend, because young people exist both as young men and as young girls, and young women as well. And secondly is just defining what meaningful youth engagement looks like. The current average age of an African president is 78 years, and that goes for every other continent, I'm sure. That means that young people do not see themselves represented in policy making or decision making. And that means there are not many clear pathways for young people to engage in governance or transparency processes. If we were to audit this room, there are not enough young people as well in panels. So I think transparency governance needs to start from meaningful youth engagement, and not just from speaking in panels, also from being decision makers, from being in local government, national government, international development, and in all other spaces, meaningfully without just being volunteers, also as professionals who are equally compensated. And then secondly is the issue of accountability, which is normally the most thorny issue. Young people are taxpayers, young people are constituents, young people are actors in governance. So we rarely see this approach from a government perspective. We see young people as being framed as recipients of policy, recipients of services. We do not see thus recognition of the political agency of young people, but mostly is say we have 1.4 billion young people in the world. Let's prevent them from messing this up. That's the approach we normally have. So I think it's important for us to be recognizing that beyond them being young people, they also pay taxes. They may not be paying taxes from employment, but they are paying taxes from consuming goods at the very least. So it's important for us to be accountable, for us to also engage them in decision making. And secondly, it's also for us to be grounded in our human rights-based approaches. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of the policy approach is very instrumentalist, looking at the numbers of young people and how can we prevent them from causing harm, or how can we utilize them as economic development tools. It is important to recognize the whole spectrum of the rights that young people have, and also to recognize the next point I have is the intersectionality and the diversity of young people. Young people who live in urban areas, young people who live in rural areas, young people with disability, young girls and young women. What we see in youth development and in youth engagement, we also see the gender disparities. For example, we have more young men who are politically engaged as compared to young women who are politically engaged. And the next point I'll have is that when young people are also disadvantaged, for example, they are indigenous, they have diverse sexual orientation, gender identity, with disability, they also have much less chances of participating. So it's important for us to also recognize that transparency becomes a bit more complicated if young people are coming from disadvantaged communities. And for my way forward is just to also recognize, in particular, the barriers to transparency and governance for especially young women. From where I come from, you mentioned in Africa, we have a much heavier and due burden of other diseases, but mostly HIV. 67% of young people who are affected by HIV are young women and adolescent girls. So it means they do not have the same opportunities. Secondly, they also have much less access. Beyond just participating in economy, just controlling their own bodies, they cannot decide who to have sex with, who to get married to, whether to have FGM or not. So it means they do not have control of their own bodies. How then can they participate in governance or even in decision making in general? They have less access to education, and so it means that education is a way of people being able to make democratic decisions or being able to make informed choices. So when they have less access to education, it makes it a bit more difficult for them to engage. As we know, 1.8 billion young people around the globe are wrestling with poverty, unemployment, conflict, migration, discrimination and lack of social protection, and more so for adolescent girls and young women. Also, this includes climate change and others. And so what it means that education has a link to social challenges. When you have less education, you're more prone and more adversely affected by other challenges in general. And finally, is unpaid care work. A lot of girls are still stuck in household chores. When you're distributing work at home, it's the girls who are left to work and not the boys. So it means they have much less time beyond the other challenges. They have much less time to engage in democracy and governance. And finally, for me, just to recognize that SDG 16 links very strongly with SDG 5 and SDG 3. So it's important for us to have that holistic and round-robin outlook when thinking of SDGs, transparency, and especially young women. For them, they have to disentangle themselves from much more challenges as opposed to their male counterparts. But I also appreciate that starting with this forum and these platforms, we are able to voice up these challenges and ensure that we are guided by the principle of leave no one behind. Thank you.
Okay, I cannot agree more, because you made a very excellent, the presentation articulating how we can make a link between SDG 60 and other goals, 5, 3, and 5 anything. That is a good example, So from the youth, feminist point of view, how we can fully utilizing SDGs, especially 16, and also you highlighted 5, right? 5 and 16, gender equality and women's empowerment, and then 16. How many are from Africa in this room? Let me see, our friends. Okay, good. compared to previous, I think the C20 we have a more better representation now. I hope you can also share your experience in the different workshops. And also I like very much the importance of the human rights-based approach. Okay, I think that's the one we need to really promote. Not for human rights, but human rights-based approach to all the SDGs. Okay, let's move to the next one. Another young voice, very Hatsuna Yamamoto. I read your news article, very interesting. Please share what you have been doing to promote the equality within education and young people. She's not working in Japan, internationally, So okay, let's give a big hand.
My name is Kazuna Yamamoto, and first of all, Catherine, I loved, as a youth feminist myself, I loved what you said and agreed to everything you mentioned. Again, my name is Kazuna Yamamoto. I'm currently the director of an international organization based in South America called Educate For, and the president of Voice of Japan, an organization me and my colleagues here in this room have started to voice up about gender issues and also helping to encourage people to voice up more in a society where we say, or a society where it's very easy to get shut down if you raise your voice. Before we think about democratic governance, I think it is very important to truly understand what is behind this word democracy. Democracy meaning the power of people in Greek. I'd like all of you here to ask yourself, what is democracy, as you hear what I will say right now. As John Adams, the second president of the United States, stated, liberty cannot be preserved without a general knowledge among the people who have a right and desire to know. In other words, a healthy system of government is an open government that allows all who desire to know to find the information they are seeking. Today, I will be focusing on, first of all, the importance of an expressive education system, the lack of sexual education here in Japan, gender-based violence, and the importance of free press in terms of sexual violence. Recently, there was an article published by HuffPost Japan that said that the Japanese government has reviewed the curriculum guidance for sexual education for the first time in 14 years. This revision did not include the word seiko, which means sexual intercourse, or hinin, which means contraceptions. By being very opaque about the education we receive, it is reinforcing the idea of tabooness on certain topics, especially sex. This is dangerous, where it leads to sexual violence not being spoken more actively. Not teaching the proper education about our own bodies is hiding information away from individuals to understand themselves, protect themselves, and empower themselves. Human rights is about having the choice of what to do with your life and your body, and opacity or lack of transparency of these information is violating the basic rights. Wording and being specific is very important as well in terms of transparency. During the face-to-face preparatory meeting in February, we paid attention to the words we use and how specifically this specificity creates transparency from the government, allowing the citizens to know what exact goals the government wants to achieve in what way. Furthermore, in terms of education, it is very important to have an education system that respects the voice of each individual and encourages an individual to speak up. Japan, having a rather Confucianistic education system, has a classroom environment where teachers or professors give a one-way lecture towards students. And I think this is very common in Asian nations. And students are discouraged to speak up, or they are discouraged to have an opinion, but are rather praised to listen to the teacher and to take everything as the truth. Next year, I read that the education system here in Japan will change to a rather Socratic system, implementing debates, discussions, and presentations. And I believe this is a great step in the education system, especially in Japan, because without being able to be vocal or having the power to question another, it is very easy to believe in every information we receive. It is very easy to not question what we hear or the information we are fed. So therefore, I ask again, how is that democracy if you are trained to not think, speak up, question, or to be critical? Furthermore, in terms of policies, I would like to follow with laws regarding gender-based violence, especially because our organization, Voice of Japan, we do believe that people are gradually speaking about this Me Too movement currently happening in Japan. First of all, as many of us here already know, Japan has a huge issue regarding the gender gap. But also there is an issue regarding the sexual assault law, which in Japanese, gokanzai or jun gokanzai. Moreover, in Japan we have very little data about sexual violence. And according to the Ministry of Justice, only 18.5% of sexual assaulted victims actually report their crime. Because also due to the high unconviction rate that we have in this country, people are discouraged to speak up about sexual assault or sexual violence. Therefore, as the policy pack includes a recommendation to increase resources to prevent, respond, and monitor gender-based violence, I think it is very important because currently there is a lack of monitoring. There is a lack of information, and furthermore, the law against sexual violence has various loopholes that victims are not aware of. As an example, the current law requires there to be physical violence or torture, threat, and if not, sexual violence is not considered. Therefore, if there is not sufficient resistance, sexual violence or rape is not considered rape. But if there is mediocre level of resistance, it cannot be taken as jun gokanzai, which is semi-rape, because the victim has to be in a irresistible situation. Furthermore, the current justice system is not fully able to protect victims, specifically victims of sexual assault. There is not a sufficient support system, but a greater force trying to shut down those who are trying to speak up. Democracy is the power of the people, but without full protection, or creating an environment respecting the voices of each individual, how are we able to value each person's voice and assure the protection and safety for those that are trying to speak up? How is that democracy when we do not allow the citizens of this country to speak up? Recently, there has been many shocking individual incidents of sexual violence and discouraging results, which makes me question and brings me fear about my own human rights. Due to the time, I'd like to go on. Although this is not specifically related to gender, according to the organization Reporters Without Borders, Japan has placed 67th place in terms of World Press Freedom Index. Quoting what has been written by this organization, the government continues to refuse any debate about law protecting, specifically designated secrets, under which whistleblowers, journalists, and bloggers face up to 10 years in prison if convicted of publishing any information illegally. Furthermore, recently as Voice of Japan, we have been trying to look at different sexual assault issues, and we have found some articles, but a week later, they haven't disappeared, they have been erased. Therefore, again, I would like all of you to question, what is democracy? When there is a lack of information, when there is hidden information. Before I end, lastly, I do not want to emphasize gender because I personally do not believe that one's gender should have an impact on the capability, knowledge, or potential of that person. But because we are in a country tan machista, I believe that gender equality is important because gender equality is able to lower barriers, and they are created by one's gender. For both men, women, and any person of any gender identity or sexuality to be treated with equality. Sexual violence is no different when addressing gender issues, and therefore the lack of education, information through press, or any other means is a deprivation of human rights, as without the full information, we are not capable of making rational choices. In order to move towards the SDGs, transparency is highly important, as transparency leads to democracy, to anti-corruption, and is connected to us as individuals who know and exercise the full extent of our human rights. Thank you.
Thank you. Another very powerful statement. What does it mean by democracy and transparency for victims of sexual violence? Very concrete issue. Democracy is not something all the politicians, doing at the parliament. Very day out daily life. We are living as a man and woman and for different gender identity. What does it mean, democracy and transparency? Thank you for your powerful statement. And now it's time for Q&A, but while we are preparing your question, I want to invite you once again this Policy Pack 2019. This one chapter on gender, in the table of content, and also business and human rights. All our sharing, and there's more articulation in this policy pack, gender, business and human rights, anti-corruption, and many other things. And also, particularly, there is a Tokyo Democracy Forum Declaration in this document. Of course, we are going to discuss a bit more, but as chairperson said, it was presented the Prime Minister Abe Shinzo 2 days ago, Tokyo Democracy Forum. So this is a compilation of our ideas and then propositions, but we can discuss further in this meeting today and also coming 2 days. So you can, when you prepare your question, please make a reference to this document if necessary. Okay? She spoke about the experience not only Japan but also Latin America. Who are from the Latin America and Caribbean? Please raise your hand. Okay, so we have about 10, 20. Thank you. Thank you very much also for your contribution, because last year the G20 summit was Argentina, right? There were more participants from Argentina, but this time more Asian participants. Who are from Asia Pacific now in this room? Wow, a lot. Yeah, I'm sure the last year there's more Latin America, but unfortunately we have only one country in G20 from Africa. There's South Africa, right? So we don't know when South Africa is going to host. That time we have a more African participant, I believe. Okay, how many questions? Please raise your hand. I want to divide the time according to number of questions request. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm sorry, only 5 men, no woman question. After listening your information. So I want to give a priority to woman first, sorry. I saw only the first 6 men, okay? 1, only woman first. 1, let me see how many women want to raise a question. She said the raise speaker, right? Raise a question. 1, and then?
What's up?
And any Japanese participants? Okay, 2. Okay, so let's begin with the 2 first, and then once again the man who wants to speak. Okay, okay, one by one. First, do you have a mobile microphone? Yeah, please. 2 persons first, and I'll collect 2 more. I think there are about 8 requests. Let's divide into 2. 4, I'll collect questions, and you can respond briefly, and then second round. Okay, please, identify yourself.
I'm Yamini, I work for Amnesty International. I think it was an excellent panel. Just to say that in addition to the principles of transparency and democracy, we also need to add the principle of just governance. Because in the past 1 year, we've seen such huge mobilizations of women coming forward under the Me Too movement. Yet at the same time, we've seen populist leaders come to power. There's Bush, there's Bolsonaro, all kinds of hate propaganda. So it is after all these women who are also going ahead and voting for these populist leaders who have this hate agenda, which we know the reason for. That's probably happening because women don't vote as a bloc, and we know that. But just to say, I think it's equally important to put just governance there, otherwise we're missing out on an important part.
All right, thank you. Comment from the MNC, just governance. Wow, now we have a few more. Okay, let's begin the woman first. Okay, so yes, next, and then second person. Please identify yourself, speak slowly and concisely. This is your instruction. Okay?
Hi, Namaskar, I'm Santosh. Again, coming to you. Can I know how many people are here from the LGBT community?
LGBT community. LGBT
you missed that.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, 2 or 3 of us. Okay, I'm not leaving behind right now. My question is to the Africa friends. I know it's difficult to work with the LGBT people in Kenya and other places in South Africa. While you're talking about the youth people, did you have approached any specific trans people there in your locality? And what is the structure like now?
Okay, thank you. Very clear question about LGBT, especially transgender communities. Okay, next person. Okay, yeah, the recommendation. Just immediately, yeah.
Good morning, my name is Vesta Lako, and I'm with Amrit Health Africa, based in Kenya. And to Catherine's point, I want to ask all of you a question. In Africa, 70% of our population is under 30. So what I want to ask the speakers is, what are you doing to do some youth engagement, some youth education, and how are you bringing them in to change and shift the way governance is handled in countries?
Okay, 70% population in Africa under 30. Wow, really young, you know, the continent. We have one more person here. Yes, please. Yeah, microphone.
日本語で失礼します。株式会社クレアンというコンサルティング会社に勤めている土井と申します。今はアムネスティ・インターナショナル日本で活動をしております。ぜひ日本からの参加のパネリストの方たちにお伺いしたいんですが、やはり民主主義と透明性を日本の中で確保していくために市民社会の存在というのはとても大きいと思うんですが、なかなか日本では NGO、NPO が役割として大きなものとみなされていないというところがあります。こうした部分については、どのようにしていけばもう少し存在感が大きくなるのか、そういったアドバイスをいただければと思います。
Short translation. So, I see you better than me. Okay, I'll try. She's from Amnesty International Japan, and she's just wondering, just in context, she's just wondering how to maximize. She feels like the non-profit, non-governmental sector in Japan is not as much regarded as an important sector counterpart in the Western or other rest of the world. So she's just wondering how they can do more, and how do they have a better presence in Japanese society of the non-profit and non-government civil society sectors.
Okay, thank you. So, how to strengthen the civil society participation, civil society non-profit or non-government organization. Okay, thank you. These are the four. Let me collect two more questions now from men. Okay. Wow, we have several. Can you start from the front? We'll come to you. Don't worry. So you have a microphone. Let's collect two more, and then one by one. Okay. So please prepare any question addressed to you because I will give you the floor. Two more questions, and then. Okay, and then the innovation. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you very much. I am Martin Sonika from Africa. Thank you very much, the panelists, for the brilliant presentation. I would like to target Maria with my question. It's about the map that we saw on transparency. I guess the map gives a view of what happens in the world about corruption. But we tend to have a concern about the way corruption is assessed. It looks like we point a finger on the receiving hand and we forget to assess the giving hand. So how much do you factor in that specific issue in the way you assess corruption? Thank you.
Okay. I think very important question. When you speak about democracy, corruption, many things, sometimes there's a cultural bias or certain, the political ideology. So question is whether both sides, the giving and receiving. Thank you. And let's have one more question. Yes. And then.
My name is Hirono, and I'm also used to be professor teaching economics. But anyway, I'm now currently advisor to the head of the UNDP in New York. My question is very simple. As you know, in this country, we are having a lot of local election. But the young people are not voting. They don't go to vote. This is a major problem facing us. And I see that this is a problem not only in Japan, but also in many other countries. So therefore, I'd like to hear from each individual who comes from outside Japan, what are the situations of young people voting in the election? Because to me, that is essential to respond to this the question of, the so-called non-government organization in Japan is rather weak. We can be stronger if we have young people voting, if they go to vote and express their own views.
Okay, yep.
So that's my question. And one more point to the presider. The democracy action advocate started in this country way back, not after Tokyo Democracy Forum, but we're very happy that Tokyo Democracy Forum is succeeding. All the efforts done by our forefathers. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. So how to make young people vote, not only speak, political participation, and also this forum is not an event. This is a result of the decade-long, the democratic movement in Japan. Thank you for pointing out once again. Can I collect 2 more and then give you a floor, and then we'll collect more, okay? 2 more very quickly, and then, Jia first, and then,
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Zia from Pakistan Development Alliance. I was really surprised to hear the presentation from our Japanese friends. And I was comparing the physical and the industrial development and progress made in Japan with my country, which is far, far, far behind than Japan. But the culture, the democratic rights and principles, the right to information, the violence against women, we are at the same page. So my question is that the persistent and the continuous democracies in the world having the similar kind of challenges as compared to those countries where we do not have that kind of democratic culture and values, how come we be able to, as human beings, attain not this ultimate industrial development and ultimate, mechanical world, but the human world in this universe? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So there is a different economic development, democracy, but when it comes to gender, women's equality, there is no big difference, right? This is a fundamental. Okay, I'm now watching my time. Do we have to finish this one, the 11:10? How many more questions? Oh, fine. Is it okay we collect all the questions and then you answer once? Because I'm very concerned about dividing into 2, may not have enough, okay? So let's collect all the questions and then I will give you a floor, right? So you organize yourself, right? Okay, let's continue to collect all the questions, one round. Okay, sorry. Yeah, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you. My name is Ken.
This one, yes.
My name is Ken Melvin, Jamaica. I learned a lot about the importance of the transparency for the democracy today. But I'd like to also ask, what is the negative side for the transparency, which you did not touch? That means privacy. Privacy is also human rights. But now, even in Japan, so many so-called surveillance cameras are also going to introduce so-called My Number, which control everybody's income. Maybe necessary, but who is controlling this? How can we draw the line between transparency and the privacies? And for me, also you did not touch the importance of the governance. Yes, transparency is important for democracy, but also important is the governance. That means who and how to control all this transparent information. So what do you think about this point? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for another important point. What if right to privacy is violated in the name of transparency? Okay, this is. Next, can continue. Yes, please identify yourself.
I'm Denison Jayasuriya from Malaysia, non-C20 country. I thank all the panelists for your contribution, including the opening session speakers. I think a background to government, political development in the context of economic development and the development of democracy, human rights. I think both Korea and Japan has had a past history of a hard state, benevolent hard state, similar to what Singapore has adopted. And so I want to have a reflective view in terms of how both JICA, KOICA, Japanese Korean model has come to affirm economic development in the context of the development of democracy, human rights, transparency, because Malaysia has just undergone democratic change after 60 years. People voted for democratic reform, but are actually impatient because institutional reform on corruption, transparency takes a long time, and people want economic well-being now, reduced costs of, and as a result, popularism, majoritarianism actually dominates the political scene, and often not so democratic leaders get elected. So what is your opinion in seeing change towards this SDG 16 in the context of realities of ordinary people and the impact on their lives? Thank you.
Okay, so this question is not only the speakers and also welcome congratulatory remarks. So Pato-san, so if you want, you can answer his question. Okay, let's continue. Yeah, yes, please. And then we have three more questions. Briefly, please.
I'll be brief. I'm Miriam van der Stickler from SOMO in the Netherlands. We're not for the moment invited to the G20 as a country. And I think one thing we're not talking about is we should have much more transparency about how the financial sector is operating. Remember, G20 was about financial reform, and it really failed. But of course, the financial sector is very much involved in all this bribery, money laundering. Don't forget on your index there's a huge amount of laundering that has been discovered now in Denmark, Netherlands, and so on. So also there might be another financial crisis coming which has a huge impact on democracy. So I hope we will be able to raise this issue. There's a session on the last day, but that's an important issue as well.
Okay, thank you very much. G20 was born because of financial crisis in the United States, which connected the whole world. Thank you for raising the question. Let's move to another one in the back. Yes. And also, I want to make it clear, who are from the G20 country, please raise your hand. Okay. Non-G20 countries. Wow, equal number, we are very equal here, G20 is an elite country, so-called most powerful industrial country, but C20 is open to all, So leave no one behind, that's what we are practicing. So don't say, I'm from G20 or non-G, that doesn't matter, We belong to the same community, the same vision, okay? So let's please,
Jorge Saavedra, a chef from Mexico. My question is to Yaswami Sama, because he mentioned it about the Panama Papers, and usually, well, that's a good source of corrupt people there. But usually also, when we highlight Panama Papers, we are highlighting Panama as a tax haven or a corrupt country. And that happens with a lot of developing countries which are tax haven. But there are also European Union tax havens that are usually not mentioned, because in our region, in Latin America, a lot of our corrupt politicians, they prefer to send the money to Switzerland. And we don't have the Switzerland papers, because that's, they are very sensitive. But it's not mentioned, like it is just a problem for developing countries that have tax havens, but not the European Union, because they are more protected or they have different rules. And my last question is, in terms of corruption, is there a way to label as corruption the way prices of drugs, especially antiretrovirals, are set to developing countries? Because sometimes it's impossible to access those life-saving treatments just because of the way prices are set, there are no international rules to comply, and sometimes there's corruption involved there as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for answering. So what about Swiss paper next time? Luxembourg. There are many tax havens, not only the Panama. Okay, let's in the back, please, and then last one will come. Okay.
Thank you, Anselmo. My name is Aftupan. I'm from Jakarta, Indonesia. Just a question, and I need comment from all of us here. How to collect the voices of non-G20 countries to bring in the G20 countries, or how to push it more stronger on how to shut down tax haven country, because it's very important on how to dealing with tax and fiscal transparencies globally. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Responsible G20 countries for the transparency issue. Let me see, is there any more hand? Okay, one here, please, and then.
My name is Sono Lee from Japan, Korea. I have a very simple question. My question goes to Ms. Nagasawa. You mentioned that you set up some 10 principles for human rights, the business principle. Is there anything you can share? You're working with especially child labor in the issue, child labor in the issue among you in the world. Thank you very much.
Education for you, child labor business principle, and then maybe the last one. Question you want to speak, right? No? Okay, so no more, right? So you exercise your freedom of expression and right to question, okay? So with this one, I'm going to give a floor to all the panelists, but time is very limited. That's why we have a workshop. Don't worry. We are going to address all your questions more in depth in the workshop. So here is. Sorry, one more. Okay, the last one. So we have to leave no one behind. I got no leave question behind. So this is the last question, please.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Liu Wangjuan, and I'm from China. I'm working at the Chinese Association for Life Care. We are concerned about the hospice care and for the elderly and the teenagers who are fragile and helpless. And I think the transparency is important for the teenagers who are crazy about now like telephone and PC. They just lost themselves about some information, and I think for teenagers, especially for teenagers, they need some help about get rid of some bad information from the telephone or some internet. Okay, thank you.
Okay, it's about young people in China. Okay, you're from China, right? You know that China was host of G20 2016, right? I heard that there are many. How many from the China, from CSO? Wow, how many? Oh, very good. Special welcome, our neighboring country, All right, good. Because China also made a big contribution to SDG. SDG became the agenda of the G20 at 2016, Hangzhou, right? Okay, thank you for your contribution. So now, I got the information from the organizer. We can have 5 more minutes, so that each one you have 2 minutes, okay? So, no speech, just get to the point. The rest you can invite them to your workshop, so that you can discuss more, okay?
Okay, 2 minutes. Anyway, I will be around until Tuesday, and I will be really happy to talk with you, because I think that I will not be able to answer so many interesting but different questions in 2 minutes. Martin, starting with your question, yes, at Transparency International we totally agree with you on that, and that's why we don't only have the CPI, but we also have a specific report that is called Exporting Corruption, where we assess specifically what you are talking about. And also the IMF last year has a new anti-corruption framework where they are also assessing this. So now it's not only NGOs working on this, but also international organizations, because it's completely true what you are saying. In fact, not many years ago, in some European countries, it was not illegal to pay foreign bribes, and some very powerful European countries used to do this, their business people. Regarding how we engage youth people at Transparency International, for us, youth is really, really very important, and according to our recent report, for youth people, climate change and corruption are major challenges. So we have a specific transparency school that is open for young people all over the world. They can apply and they come with us 2 weeks. We also are doing our 2030 vision process where we are inviting young people to have their ideas and perspectives. And finally, as we are always engaging the C20, last year we worked closely together with the Youth 20, that is a specific engagement group for young people, and we released a joint statement with them and all the other engagement groups, but not the B20, calling G20 countries to implement their commitments. Regarding transparency in financial sector, that was the question raised by Somo. Yes, of course, at Transparency International, we totally agree on that. In fact, our CPA clearly says that there are problems at the bottom of the CPA, basically because Denmark, has this recent scandal of last year of money laundering, and it's something that we stated very clear, but the CPA doesn't assess anti-money laundering, that's why it doesn't reflect there. But yes, I want to make really clear that we are having corruption problems all over the world, at the top and at the bottom of the CPA. Your question about information and privacy, yes, it's totally true, and all rights have limits. I believe that we should always try and focus on transparency and make sure that maybe if we are having some kind of challenge where privacy can be a problem, then we should do, like an access, and there we also need the judiciary power. I have been working on access to public information for more than 3 years, and I have to go to court many times because sometimes when governments, they don't want to give you the information, they say like, this is not public information, this is, like private information, when maybe we are asking for very, very basic things. And again, I believe that their technology also plays a key role. As I said, it really has a lot of opportunities for all of us, but also some challenges, on individual rights, freedoms, and especially maybe on elections. So that's something I will be happy to continue talking with you. And my time is up.
Thank you. Let's move to...
Okay, let me answer some questions, particularly about Japan and me, myself. Firstly, I would like to answer the question raised by the Mexican gentleman. First of all, I would like to underline that ICIJ, which I belong to, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, have already done about Swiss leaks, which focused on the secret document tax problems with HSBC Bank, and also Luxembourg leaks as well. So we are not targeting particularly Latin America. That is, I believe, a very bad style of stereotype. I hate that. So we have to be, with a very broad perspective of what's happening on the world. Answering the question about the price of medical drugs worldwide, it's a serious issue. Tackling that problem is a very daunting task, I know. But from the perspective of journalists, I would like to underline that we can deal with only with right information. What's happening, what's going on in the rest of the world, in the disadvantaged place with the extremely high price they are paying. The first step which take is obtain information what is happening. We can share, we can ask. So that is my view on that question. The second, and that is also, that view is also applied to the question raised by the Japanese gentleman there about the privacy, because we can't stop the development of the digital technology at all. We can't stop development of the digital technology. So what we can do is who is breaching of privacy and how. So that is also another part of transparency. We can't make it secret. We should make it transparent as much as possible. That is how to combat the breach of and abuse of the power. And thirdly, I would like to answer my question about the question raised by the Japanese lady sitting over there about how to raise awareness more about the civil society in this country. So I share your frustration. I've been frustrated by how the Japanese media society is dealing the activities with civil society much smaller than what it's supposed to be. So my recommendation is that we should build better connection with influencers, including journalists. Unfortunately, I don't think we are reaching the younger generation as much as 10 years ago. However, we can do that, and of course we can find who are really influential with the younger generation, like my colleague sitting here. And how to make headline. Headlines are very important, and opinions are everywhere online. Everybody is raising their opinion. What journalists need is the fact and evidence. That tells, and that matters. Thank you.
Thank you. About the child labor question, Yuka will going to answer your question, maybe. She knows better than me. And I cannot answer all the questions, but I tell you the truth that in the beginning of the 2017, by the beginning of the 2017, I never dreamed of business people wearing SDG badge. And if you, Monday and Tuesday, you will see a lot of business people wearing this. And they are committed to SDGs. And so there will be a chance for civil society to engage in with the business sector. And because for the human rights issues, many of the cases, business alone cannot solve the problem or issues. So there is a chance. And as I told you, Article 9 of the Charter deals with the fight against organized crime. It tells us the lessons. The key element for the success that eliminate, it's still there, but eliminate from the business is the firm commitment and voluntary action in the business sector, and collective action among industry, and strong cooperation with government, and no behind-the-scene transaction and cover-up. Because they need to work with the government, especially the policies. But yet, even corporations firmly determined to drive out organized crime may find themselves unknowingly conducting business with corporations and entities linked to organized crime. Same is true for transparency, human rights abuses. I strongly believe that voluntary action of business with engagement with NGO, which can be watchdog and offers solutions, and experts in this field, as Mario said, will lead to the sustainable, inclusive society.
Are you feeling comfortable now? Are you feeling comfortable now?
Not yet.
Stay with us 2 more days and you'll feel very happy and comfortable. Okay, next please.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll respond to a few questions as well. And I just wanted to speak to the question of young people not voting. What we have seen in most African countries now is that the revolutions that we are seeing are led particularly by young people. The face of Sudan revolution is a 22-year-old young woman. The face of Algerian as well is young people, and the Arab revolutions as we saw them were young people. So I think young people are frustrated by democracies that do not work for them, that do not address inequalities. When they engage, they want something transformative. It's the same thing as we saw in the US elections. The current most vocal young representatives are young women from minority communities. So I think it's a mischaracterization of not voting, but rather a frustration in systems, if you ask me, because as my colleague mentioned, if you're 70% of a population, yet you do not have enough political agency or say in the economy, it becomes a little bit difficult for you to trust the system. Especially when we vote, sometimes your vote does not count. So I think it's important for us to think of it that way, that the current wave of change we're seeing across the world is led by young people and mostly young women. And so that we need to be focusing on what gender justice means as we discuss democracy, because as we have seen traditionally, the burden of democracy also lies on women. The cost of democracy as well also lies on young people and women as well. So it's critical for us, as we ask for young people to engage, we also understand what the cost for them is as well. And in terms of diversity of what meaningful youth engagement means, if you look at civil society amongst young people, it's more diverse. We are speaking much more amongst young people of diverse sexualities, gender identities. Our movements are more inclusive, and so it means that the previous divides we had amongst civil society are being bridged through the youth movements. We are speaking more with our trans counterparts, with our LGBTQ counterparts. We have more transnational movements because of digital technology. So I think it's what also the revolution of civil society is. And finally, about the financial sector, I think it's critical for me to comment as an African that of the illicit of the aid that we receive as Africa, it does not match the amount of money that leaves our continent. From the Becky report, we had 65 US billions leaving the continent. It does not match up the aid that we receive and the conditionalities that the aid comes with. So Africa is giving more to the world than we are receiving, and it's the young people who are losing their employment, who are losing their rightful birthright and access to those resources as a result. So I think democracy also means thinking of what international policies means in terms of young Africans who are losing the birthright through this phase.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to specifically talk about the part about engagement in youth. I do, for example, as our team for Voice of Japan, we are engaging in youth through giving seminars at universities or even creating these type of symposiums at universities so that we can encourage more youth to actually think about it as a day problem. Because in Japanese, I think there's a word called tojishaishiki, which is about people considering such issues for their issues. And I do believe that actually connects to the part of the political sector and how the youth do not vote, because I can speak for the youth that the people around me do not vote as well. They do not talk about politics. Whenever I do talk about politics, a lot of people would be like, oh, let's not talk about that. But throughout my experience in South America, I have definitely seen more people being active. I think that has to also do with the history. Unfortunately, in Japan, I do believe we are in a heiwa boke. We are kind of being dumbed down due to the peace. Because I feel like after the Second World War, people in Japan are less political active. Gradually, for example, in universities, there are no riots, there are no strikes. Whereas when I was in Chile, for example, there were many student-led protests, there were student-led strikes. I think that also has to do with the recent history where there was a dictatorship. Therefore, a lot of the people around me actually have more stories related to their parents or their grandparents, their uncles and aunts that have suffered the dictatorship during the Cold War. Therefore, I do think that democracy in that sense in other nations are much more valued. Therefore, people are much more vocal about their opinion. But at the same time, I do believe it's something related to the education system, that right here in the Japanese education system, I believe, unfortunately, in elementary school, middle school, high school, they do not talk about politics as much. The teachers are trying to be as neutral as possible. They do not have, for example, debates about politics. And I do believe that those are the things that kind of nourish one's critical thinking, and especially in terms of politics. And yes, and in terms of, I also have one point regarding parts of NGO, how NGOs are in Japan. I do believe there is a stereotype where NGOs, NPOs, charities, they're all kind of very vague. And for example, for what we try to do is we actually participate in, for example, when we participate with schools, we actually go there when the parents are there so that the parents can see the legitimate activities we are doing or how we are engaged with the society and the community and the school. And I do believe more actively engaging, especially through education systems, will change, because through the education system, there are more opportunities to connect not only with the parents but with the kids. And in the future, in the long run, especially educating and changing the stereotypes towards NGOs to the youth will be a change in the long term. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, time's off, so we have to end the opening plenary. I don't want to make any summary, but I want to remind you the theme of this plenary panel and then general. If you look at the program too, this title of Why Transparency Was So Important for Democratic Governance was the theme of this panel. But overall, today we are going to have a workshop. Theme is Promoting Peace, Human Rights, Democratic Governance through SDG 16+. This is the overall theme of all today Democracy Forum. I hope starting with this panel, you can have more in-depth discussion, especially different issues. And then at the end of the day, we can come up with a more energetic, the vision and also action plan. Thank you once again to all your panelists.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lee and panelists. Now we're moving on to breakout sessions. So we're going to start the session at 11:35. Let me change the schedule because we're behind the schedule. And we're going to start lunch 1:15. And we'll end at 2 o'clock. We'll adjust during the lunchtime. So lunch will be served first of all. And let me remind you the 2 points of housekeeping issues.